Welcome back to the show today. We're going to be talking about how the effects of greed are corrupting the NBA's integrity. The first and most obvious way this is happening is through gambling. The legalization of gambling on sports has totally changed the way the media covers sports. Sometimes when you're watching a sporting event, it can feel like the entire purpose of the sporting event is to bet on it. The Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act was overturned in 2018, giving states the ability to decide if they want to legalize gambling or not. And 40 states so far have legalized gambling. Last year, sports gambling generated $115 billion in revenue. For reference, that's over 10 times as much as the NBA generated. So people like to gamble. We all know that. It's fun. There's a lot of money to be made from fun things that people like to do. So how is this new economy affecting the product of the NBA? Well, as a television product, the NBA is constantly being recontextualized as to how much money you can make off a game. ESPN now has its own sportsbook where they actively push you during broadcasts. The commentators will openly talk about betting odds during the broadcast. And I had totally forgotten that the NBA was integrating gambling into League Pass, their streaming service for out-of-market games. Although I don't know if this feature is out yet. I don't remember it from last season. And I feel like if it had been integrated, they would have shoved it down my throat. But one thing I have noticed is there is an alternate broadcast for NBA games where it's entirely centered around gambling, like they cover up half the screen with just different overs and unders. But does this really negatively affect the viewing experience? No, not really. If anything, it can be kind of interesting, looking at the gambling odds just to see what outcome is most likely. But the issue for me is how aggressively they market the gambling apps. Like I said, the ads are literally everywhere. Most of the ad proposals I get for this show are for gambling websites. And of course, you could say the same thing about advertisements for alcohol. They're marketing an addictive product. But my issue is with the sign-up bonuses. Some will even give you $200 in gambling credits just to sign up. This is like a drug dealer giving you your first hit for free because they know you're gonna be back for that second hit. He's gonna charge you for it. I was listening to a conversation with Michael Lewis and he called sports gambling the fracking of the American sports fan, which I thought was really well put. Because you're taking this pure-hearted love of sports and corrupting it with the thrill of gambling. But hey, people can make their own decisions. And it's up to the individual to have self-control. But the newest problem with sports gambling is players betting on themselves. And most recently in the NBA on multiple occasions. We're talking about Malik Beasley. In June this year, the U.S. Attorney's Office began an investigation on Malik Beasley, involving some prop bets that happened while he was on the Bucks. Someone noticed a very drastic change in the over-under for Malik's rebounds in favor of the over. And sure enough, Malik finished with 6 rebounds when his over-under was set at 2.5, which prompted people to look into other games where Malik might have been rebound shaving. And there was some evidence to be found. There's one of him letting Tyrese Halliburton just blow right past him just randomly losing control on a fast break. But I think the worst one is this 3-point shot. He's wide open and he just butterfingers the ball out of bounds. Mind you, this was during a playoff game. This was game 6 against the Knicks. The series ended with this game and he could have tied it right there. Personally, I just think he f***ed up. But the real telling game is this one right here. This was a random game against the Clippers while he was on the Wolves. The Wolves were down by 9. The game was over and there was 5 seconds left. Beasley sprints down the court and dunks it, cutting the deficit to 7 points. Why would Malik do this, other than the fact that the spread was 7.5 points? So evidently now Malik is not the target of the U.S. Attorney's investigation, which is weird. I feel like there's a lot of evidence, but I'm sure it really doesn't matter. I'm sure a lot of NBA teams are calling up Malik's agent because after all, NBA teams don't really care. As long as you can make 4 threes a game at a 40% clip, who gives a? So, we need to talk about Kawhi Leonard. As a lot of you may know, Kawhi Leonard signed a deal with Aspiration Incorporated, an eco-friendly fintech company. The weird thing about the contract is it doesn't really require Kawhi to do anything. Technically, he's supposed to engage with the brand on social media in a couple different ways, but there's a clause in the contract saying that he actually doesn't have to do it and there's no legal ramifications if he doesn't. Aspiration can't come after Kawhi if he doesn't do the things in the contract. Well, this makes no sense whatsoever. The other celebrities with endorsement deals with Aspiration were actually investors in the product. So if they were asked to not post or do anything, that would kind of make sense. But Kawhi was not an investor, and he got paid more than Robert Downey Jr., Leonardo DiCaprio, and Drake, all guys who were investors and actually did promote on social media. Kawhi literally did nothing for a contract worth $28 million. So why does it matter? What's this got to do with the Clippers and Steve Ballmer? Well, Steve Ballmer was an investor in Aspiration, and Kawhi's contract happened to say that if he is no longer on the Clippers, then the contract is void. Why would Aspiration care if Kawhi is a Clipper? What's it to them? Are the Aspiration founders big Clippers fans? Well, we should ask the founder. Oh, well, we can't because he's been arrested for fraud. Then, of course, Steve Ballmer is on ESPN saying, how should I know about the deal between Kawhi and Aspire? I don't care. It's none of my business. Oh, there's a line in the contract that says Kawhi has to give Steve Ballmer a foot massage every year? That's weird. Who put that in there? Let's ask Kawhi about the contract. Kawhi declines to respond. Of course he doesn't. Kawhi's people took care of it. He just cashed the check. check. If you want to talk to Kawhi, you'll have to indict him, and he still won't say anything because he probably doesn't know anything. So I have to say, if Ballmer and the Clippers get out of this thing with no punishment, whether they meant to or not, they will have successfully circumvented the salary cap. As a matter of fact, they will successfully have gotten caught circumventing the salary cap and got away with it. Remember, it pays to be rich. So a lot of people are comparing this Kawhi case to the Joe Smith case in Minnesota. So in 1999, Joe Smith signed a $1.75 million contract with the Minnesota Timberwolves. This signing immediately smelled fishy. Joe Smith was disappointing for a #1 overall pick, but he was still a good player. He was a productive small forward, getting 13 points a game, 8 rebounds. The market value for a player like Joe was at least $4 million, and definitely a longer contract than 1 year. People just chalked it up to Joe wanting to win a championship with Kevin Garnett. But a year later, Andrew Miller, the agent of Joe Smith and coincidentally Kevin Garnett, left his agency. The owner of the agency sued Andrew Miller, and in an act of retaliation, he leaked some documents. Documents that exposed Joe Smith and the Timberwolves circumventing the salary cap. They were legal documents saying that Joe would sign a series of 1-year contracts for 3 years at the league minimum. By the end of those 3 years, when the Wolves would have his bird rights, he would then sign a 7-year contract for $86 million. You can't do that. Now, if the Timberwolves had just promised Joe that he would get an $86 million contract at the end of these 3 years, that would have worked. They could have just pinky swore if he was a good boy and stayed patient, he could have signed a giant contract. They could do all that, they just couldn't put it in writing. But they did put it in writing. So the league came down really hard on Joe and the Timberwolves. Joe's contract was voided and the Timberwolves owed a $3.5 million fine. GM Kevin McHale and owner Glenn Taylor were banned from the NBA for 1 year. The worst of all is the Timberwolves forfeited 5 first-round picks. So I don't think that the Kawhi aspiration case is going to result in something like this though, because I don't believe the NBA investigation is going to lead to any type of paper trail like the Joe Smith case did. So we don't talk about FTX enough, and it kind of bothers me. I think the FTX scandal is one of the biggest blemishes on the NBA and sports in general. But the guilty parties never really got the public humiliation that I think they deserve. So FTX was a crypto exchange run by a boy named Sam Bankman-Fried. Sam Bankman-Fried was using his customers' deposits in FTX to make risky bets with his hedge fund Alameda Research. Another thing you can't do. This caused a run on FTX when customers wanted their money, and the money wasn't there. FTX declared bankruptcy and eventually folded. Sam Bankman-Fried is in prison for fraud for the next 25 years. And as of now, FTX customers still have $2 billion worth of unrecovered assets. But a lot of sports teams and athletes made a lot of money off of FTX before it folded. The Miami Heat sold their naming rights to their stadium a year before. Steph Curry, Shaquille O'Neal, Shohei Ohtani, Tom Brady all did endorsement deals. They all got paid from this corrupt company. So the FTX customers filed a class action lawsuit and they named all these athletes. The claim was not that the athletes knew about the fraud, but that they'd lended their credibility. They made FTX seem like a safe exchange and a nice place to keep their money, which is true. That's why they were hired. If Tom Brady says it's legit, it's probably legit. Now, Shaq agreed to a $1.8 million settlement with the FTX customers, but Steph Curry and the other athletes are still currently being sued. I think this is a good thing because I think people have forgotten what it means to endorse a product. If you stake your reputation on something you don't believe in or don't even understand, you run the risk of your reputation suffering. So why do sports teams relocate, especially if the team has a very passionate fan base in the city? It feels like a very heartless thing to do to just move a team when they're so attached, just to take away their culture and move it somewhere else. Well, I'll tell you why it happens. It's money. It's always money. Generally, it's because the owner wants money from the city. Generally, they want money from the city for a new stadium. Let's take the example of the Seattle Supersonics. The Sonics had been part of Seattle for 41 years. They'd even won a championship in 1979. But Clay Bennett bought the team in 2006 and he moved it in 2008 to Oklahoma City because the city of Seattle would not help him build a new arena. Oklahoma City, on the other hand, had a brand new arena that the taxpayers had helped fund. And just like that, Seattle lost their beloved Supersonics. So why doesn't Seattle have a franchise now? I mean, the NBA has been talking about expansion for like 10 years. The answer will not shock you. Greed. The owners don't want to add expansion teams. They don't want to share. If they add expansion teams, all that revenue from the new TV deal gets split another 2 ways, from 30 to 32. They'd get a smaller portion of the pie. Even though an expansion fee for a team would be around $7 billion, so if they add 2 teams, that's $14 billion shared amongst all 30 owners, it's still not worth it to give up a fraction of that ESPN, Amazon, NBC money. So I don't think we're going to see expansion teams for a really long time unless the NBA finds itself in a very desperate financial situation. And if COVID wasn't a desperate enough financial situation, I don't know what will be. All right, that's the end of the show. Thank you for being here. Thank you for liking the video. I appreciate that. Leave a comment. I think I'm all caught up, still doing the comments. And then there's a Patreon, the super cheap Patreon, $2 every Saturday podcast. You know about it. Be good to your mothers. Eat a corn dog.